it's something that has never existed before. A commodity, the supply cannot be expanded. I mean, price of gold goes up, we make more gold. Price of oil goes up, we'll drill for more oil. Price of anything goes up. Corn goes up, we'll plant more corn. Price of Bitcoin goes up, doesn't matter, same amount. That's just different. It's literally, we've never had that before, which is why I often say, I think when the history is written of this time, we'll look at it and we'll say, there's before Bitcoin and after Bitcoin, in the financial markets. Because after Bitcoin, we had, natural scarcity. I mean, just true, immutable scarcity. And that should continue to go up forever.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode today of the podcast. Really appreciate you being here. Today we have Lawrence Lepard, who has been an excellent voice in the Bitcoin world for many years. I've been following and listening to all of your podcasts. You've been all over the place and just putting out great content on Twitter, which is so useful for all of us idiots who are trying to learn all this history of money and gold and Bitcoin, which you have an excellent understanding of. So, Larry, thanks for coming by, man.
Well, thanks for having me on, Ben. I've always enjoyed your podcasts, and it's nice to be here. So, yeah, it's Twitter. You learned on Twitter, but not anymore. They've shut me out for the third time now.
Three times.
I did not get hacked. The message I got was there's suspicious activity. We're suspending your account. And of course, getting through to customer service there is impossible because they don't really have any customer service. So actually, it's kind of a relief. It gives me a break, and I've got a lot of the things I can work on. So
exactly. Yeah, this is the right mindset to have. And those of us who are on Nostr and have had similar things happen to us, like for me, it's been more quiet shadow banning of just getting zero views on anything when I say certain words.
Yeah, and it
means you're saying the right thing.
Yeah, well, exactly, I guess so. I mean, I'm on Nostr too, and I really enjoy Nostr. And anyone who wants to reach me, that's probably the best way to reach me. So,
excellent.
It's a great alternative.
Yeah, so I would love to get your backstory. I just listened to your episodes with Robert Breedlove, and you've been doing the rounds recently. But I love the journey that you've taken, because you have a lot of experience in the financial industry, which spans through a lot of time in gold and now Bitcoin. So where did you come from, Lawrence Lepard? What was your what originally got you into finance?
Yeah, it's been a lot of this stuff. It's in the book, and I've done a lot of podcasts, but I'll quickly reprise it. I mean, I grew up in the Midwest. I went to college. I probably should have gotten an engineering degree because my highest and best use, I like to figure shit out. I just kind of like understanding how stuff works. And my father was a businessman, and I always kind of thought I wanted to be in business. And so in college, I kind of sorted through the idea that, hey, being an investor is a way to intellectually figure things out and then be involved in businesses and make bets on who's going to work and who's not. And I think I read something about and by Warren Buffett, and I was like, wow, that's what I want to do. I want to be a really great investor. So after college, I went to Wall Street, and I worked there for a couple of years as a financial analyst. And then I went to business school and got an MBA. And in my MBA, I really focused on investing. How does one become a good investor? And I also was lucky because my father was kind of a early computer adopter, tinker, hacker. And he said, Larry, like the scene in The Graduate where the guy says plastics. My father said, if I were you, I'd get involved in technology and computers. I think it's going to be a big area. And he was right. And so I actually got out of business school and got into the venture capital business, became a technology investor. And so I did that for some time. I mean, really from early 80s all the way into the mid 20s, 2005 or so was when I kind of gave it all up. And I invested in disk drives and floppy disks and graphic cards and software. And I mean, you name it, we did it, as modems. And as all the stuff kind of grew and all the things that we all take for granted today, in 81 that was when the IBM PC was introduced. So, before that, there wasn't really a personal computer market. And I participated in all of that as an investor with venture capital firms. And probably the tail end of that, the most exciting thing I participated in was the internet. I got really lucky. I became aware of the internet in 1993, and I started trying to find private internet companies to invest in. We invested in a ton of them, and some of them didn't work, but some of them worked really well. And so that was a big success for me, and it led to getting to a stage in my life, and that world, the venture capital world, was flying the red eye and working 80 hours a week, and it was really hard. And I had a wife and kids, and so I kind of, with the internet stuff, I'd done well enough that I was kind of like, I really want to slow down. And so I kind of exited the venture capital business in the 2003 to 2005 timeframe, and I started managing my own money. And with the kind of notion that I wanted to find things that were growing and technologically oriented, and and so forth. And then the GFC happened, and that, the global financial crisis. And 2008 really kind of changed my life, because throughout all this, I'd been kind of a sound money person. I'd read The Austrian Economist. My grandfather was a gold bug, etc. But I wasn't really focused on monetary stuff very much in that time frame. I was focused on technology. But when '08 happened, they took the interest rates down to zero, and they started printing money like crazy, expanding the Fed balance sheet. And I mean, these were really big, untested, radical moves. And I was like, oh my God, I know what this means. They're going to trash the currency. And so I kind of pivoted my life, and I thought, well, I've got to get involved in things that are going to be protected from trashing the currency. And at the time, Bitcoin white paper was just out. I didn't even know it existed. The way to invest in an inflationary environment where the currency is getting trashed, I mean, a couple 100,000 years of history, is you buy gold and silver. And then the way to get alpha is you buy gold and silver mining companies, because they represent streams of gold and silver. They're like miniature central banks. If gold and silver are money, mining companies are central banks. They can create money. And so I started a mining fund, put my own money into it, raised a lot of other people's money, and that's what I've been doing since then. It still lives to this day. It's had some ups and downs, but gold and silver were my entree into sound money. So then, I guess I kind of became aware. I was aware of Bitcoin pretty early, because I was on the Kaiser show, and Max originally was a gold and silver bug, and he was trying to convince me on Bitcoin. I was skeptical. My skepticism really related to, I just didn't think anyone could technically do it. It had been, for those who aren't familiar, it had been attempted many, many times in the 90s and so forth. I mean, there was eCash, DigiCash, B-Money, Hashcash. I mean, there were a lot of, none of them worked. They all had a flaw. They were all centralized. Something was wrong with each of them. And so when Bitcoin came along, somebody said, well, there's going to be another electronic form of money. It's going to separate the state and the money printer. I was like, that's a great idea, but it's not going to work. Because I based that just on the simple mental heuristic, because the 5 before it didn't work. And what I didn't realize is that with each of those 5 items before, 5 attempts before, something new got learned, right? I mean, oh, okay, well, maybe if we do this, so that'll make it better. Yeah, okay, fine, but then there's another flaw. And so, Adam Back, he figured out, kind of the proof of work concept, and other people brought in different pieces. And obviously Satoshi, or these Satoshis, if it was a group, they kind of put it all together. And so, I'm watching $1, $2. I'm like, I'm ignoring it. $10, $20, $100. I'm like, well, okay, it's getting some traction. And then when it went from 100, first I went from like 100 to 300 or 1,000. I was like, okay, hang on a second. This was, I think, 2012 or 13 timeframe. There's something going on here. So I started trying to figure, I got to buy some of this. I got to understand this better. So I started in the process of opening up an account at Mt. Gox. And fortunately, before I sent the money, they failed. So although actually I heard people who had money that still made a fortune, because when they did get paid out eventually, it was still like 100x what they had in, even though they'd lost a lot of the coins. Anyway, fortunately, I didn't get caught up in all of that. And so when Coinbase came public in 2013, suddenly you had a venture capital backed, legitimate broker. And I thought about the whole notion, well, I'm going to go to a cafe and give somebody $100 or $1,000, and they're going to give me a QR code and a string of characters. And I just like, that just doesn't, I can't do that. But Coinbase came out and I bought a couple of coins. And so then I got hooked. And I just kept studying it. And my conviction, to be fair and honest, my conviction was still fairly low in those 14, 15, 16 days, because, we had some hard forks, we had the block size wars, we had, and I'd go to these MIT forums, I'd sit next to core developers, I'd say, do you trust this thing? And they're like, well, yeah, kind of. It's an experiment, and they'd say, one guy said to me, I worry that when I make a change, I'm going to go home that night and I croak the whole network. And I'm thinking, how can you put big money in this thing if it's still technologically pretty uncertain? So I didn't have big money in it. I had a couple handfuls of coins. But over time, I just got more and more comfortable with it. It proved, all these issues kind of got worked through, and I just kept buying. And I bought up into the run up of the fall of 2017. And of course, then it fell from 17,000 to 9, then it fell from 9 to 4, and I doubled down on both of those. So, I've just kind of consistently bought it, and my knowledge and understanding of what hashing is, what SHA-256 is, what the difficulty. I mean, all the little features that make it so unique. Obviously, over time, I learned those, and with the learning of those, I get more confident. So now I'm a full-fledged Bitcoiner, but I'm kind of a hybrid. And some people I get thrown at from both camps. And Bitcoiners say, why are you still messing around with gold? Gold guys say, why are you messing around with Bitcoin? And I just think they're both the same thing. They're both sound money. One's old-fashioned analog sound money that's going to get replaced by Bitcoin, and the other is new, technologically driven, 21 million hard cap, digital gold or digital sound money. And so there's a place for both. I mean, the digital one's more volatile. So if you're really old, you may not want to buy an asset that can go down 50 or 60%. If you're really young and you got a long time frame, you don't care, right? Because in 4 or 5 years it'll be higher. So that's kind of a brief or a quick, I think, wrap up to how I got to where I am now. And then, more recently, I mean, probably your next question, I'll just answer it in advance. I mean, so I started, I'm watching what's going on in the world, and I'm seeing how, we're in this fourth turning. There's a lot of bad stuff happening. People are yelling at each other. Politics is toxic on both sides, and I'm thinking to myself, God, this is really bothering me. My country is falling apart. It's not the country I grew up in. I know what that country was like. I know why it was better. And I need to write a book to try and explain this so that, any American can read the book and go, oh, now I get it. I see how they're screwing me. I see why the system's broken. And that's the bad news. The book's divided into two sections. First half's the problem, second half's the solution. So the problem is, here's how the monetary system has been rigged against you. And it's very hard to get wealthy, when you're paying 25% for interest rate on a credit card. It's not hard to get wealthy if you're a quintillionaire and you can borrow at ZERP. So, so the first half of the book is, here's the problem. The second half of the book is, how do you fight back and protect yourself? And it's a very hopeful part of the book too, because, even without the book, without you and I doing what I'm doing, I mean, mankind always emerges toward a better solution. I mean, humankind, we've had a lot of very bad events happen in human history, but in general, collectively, we make forward progress. And I think we're making forward progress on, on systems becoming more distributed. I think we're making more forward progress on money becoming fairer, because I think Bitcoin will become money. And so it's a very exciting time to be alive and to be watching all this. And if you're, aware of it and invest in it, I think you're going to be really well rewarded for being an early adopter of this stuff. And a lot of people say, well, it's too expensive at this price. I'm not an early adopter, but yes, you are. I mean, if you really look at the math of how many people own it, it's still a very, very small number. So that was long-winded, but it gives you a lot to chew on.
I love it. And there is so much good stuff to chew on just from your story. It has so many lessons embedded within it. And one of them, I would say, that sticks out to me is the importance of just getting your foot in the door and getting off zero, because you need to tap into that human nature of having some skin in the game in order to care about something.
Yeah,
it's impossible to convince someone to learn about Bitcoin if they don't have any.
Exactly.
I don't care if it's $10. Just get something.
It's so funny you should mention that, because that's what I tell my clients. The only wrong answer is, I've got zero. And that's why, in so many cases, when I'm sitting with a taxi driver or a restaurant, a waitress, I try an orange pill wherever I go, and I immediately say, here, let's put this wallet on your cell phone, and I'm going to send you $2. Now, $2 is no amount of money, but they see it and it hits their wallet, and they're like, wow, that's kind of interesting. And I think I might have planted a seed, and I said, you should learn more about this. This is going to be really important to you in the future. So yeah, you're right. It's like a virus, and we just have to keep spreading the word. Yeah.
It is, and the more places around the world that begin to accept Bitcoin for goods and services in random markets, in small businesses and entrepreneurs and whatnot, it just makes it easier and easier to show people the path to the future here. And As I mentioned, I'm living in Costa Rica right now, where tons of places take Bitcoin.
Wow.
Like, you go to the farmer's market and you can buy your raw milk with Bitcoin. You can buy all your food with Bitcoin. You can get your salt and, trinkets for souvenirs, all that. Right down the hill from me, I paid to go to the gym in Bitcoin. Like, everything here is Bitcoin. So
fantastic.
It's amazing. It really opens your mind to, this is how things are just going to work in the future, where you earn Bitcoin directly from peer-to-peer people who like your content. And we mentioned Nostr earlier. I'm really big on Nostr. I spend a lot of time and energy posting on Nostr and bringing value to that community. So I earn these zaps from people who voluntarily decide, I love your value, so I'm sending you Bitcoin. I use those zaps to go buy my beef.
Yeah.
This is the future, man. It's amazing.
It really is. And I'm right now, I'm actually reading Anthony Scaramucci's book, which is the Little Book of Bitcoin. It's really a beautiful little book, because he comes at it very much from a technological history point of view, and just, just points out the way that, all these industries have been disrupted. I mean, look at how Kodak got disrupted with digital photography, and then look at how Blockbuster got disrupted with streaming. And look, the Lightning wallets and the people who take Bitcoin right now, it's a drop in the ocean, right? But one can just see, just as I saw with the internet. I mean, when I started using the internet, I had to put a phone in a modem and dial up and go deet, 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 deet. And I had a green screen because Windows wasn't out yet. So, I mean, and now look at where we are. You and I are, different sides of the world, talking real time, broadcasting out to thousands. And I mean, it's amazing. And this is what the technology brings. And the same thing is going to happen with Bitcoin. If it's a network that's constantly improving and everybody's working for everybody else in the network. And so yeah, I mean, I very much see it as the future. And I have an enormous sense of deja vu, in the sense that I look at Bitcoin and I'm like, oh my God, this is just Internet 2.0, except it's for money, And I
which
know,
is arguably even bigger.
well, that's right.
Which is
Yeah,
crazy.
exactly. No, it is more important. I mean, Internet's information, and that's a big deal. That's a very, very big deal. But money touches literally everything. There's nothing that doesn't have a money price. And so, yeah, it's going to be extremely big. I mean, there's just no doubt in my mind about that. And it's already big. I mean, those who got in very early have really, just seen amazing changes in their lives. I mean, I look at, the Trace Myers and the Max Kaisers of the world who, were buying these coins at $1 or something. And it's nutty. So yeah, and I think that trend's just going to continue. So it's an important thing too. I mean, as the book talks about, Ben, I mean, that, this broken money is causing a lot of pain for a lot of people, and the inflation is really a problem, and it's going to get worse. And that's the bad news, and that's just based on analysis. It's not, being a doomer. It's just looking at what's going on. And the good news is that there are ways to protect oneself from this, and they're available to every single person. I mean, inflation's been around since the beginning of time, and wealthy people have always kind of figured out how to game it. They know how to borrow cheaply, invest in things that are inflating, and that's how they get wealthier. I mean, one of the most depressing charts in the book is a chart where it shows the top 1% of Americans own 92% of the wealth. I mean, come on, what happened to the middle class? The middle class has just gotten eviscerated because of the way the system is set up. So, yeah, but the good news is, as we all like to say, Bitcoin fixes this, and it really does. I mean, it really will. And that gives me great hope and optimism, and I'm excited about the time we live in and what's going on and what your generation is going to do and all that stuff. We're going in the right way. And the book, I guess, I wrote the book to kind of, my view is let's go faster. Let's try and push it, because the system's broken. We know there's a good system out there that we can find that's new. The sooner we get there, the better things will be. So why waste time? Let's get there sooner. Yeah.
I'd love to ask, just before moving on, you just said, it's important that we should go faster on this. We should push forward and accelerate the process. And I can hear some people out there listening and thinking, but Larry, won't that cause too much chaos? Won't ripping the Band-Aid off be worse for people? There will be more pain. What would be your case for why we should just go full speed ahead and just push through and rip the Band-Aid off on this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know that I'm right about this, and nobody knows how this is going to unfold. But look, let's go back to first principles in the bigger picture. The monetary system is broken, and it's broken because Keynesians convinced us we need inflation, and inflation is a progressive disease that gets worse and worse. It's like drinking. Eventually you die from an overdose or drinking too much. And same is true with inflation. And so we've got to stop this inflationism if we ever want to return to a normal system. I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, just like somebody who's a drunk, you go through the delirium tremens when you quit cold turkey. I mean, stopping this is going to be painful, but honestly, it's painful right now. And the thing that I always say when I talk to people about this is, wouldn't you rather have a one-time extremely painful event and then know that after that event is over, you'll not experience that anymore because the problem will be solved? And that, I think, helps people to get through okay, we've got to endure the wrenching change that this might result, the ripping of the Band-Aid, which does hurt. But once it's off, it's off. And once we're back on a sound money standard, things will get better very quickly, very, very quickly, in my opinion. So
And there's historical precedent for that of, things pretty quickly normalizing,
Ton
right?
of it. I mean, I've been on many podcasts. I've been saying one of my new friends is a guy who does a podcast, and I discovered that he was Argentinian and or maybe Brazilian. I can't remember. It's one of the two. Anyway, South American. And in 1990, 91, the country he was living in, I can't remember if it's Argentina or Brazil, was experiencing very high rates of inflation. He was a teenager at the time. And, his mom and dad were working their ass off to try and put food on the table. And they'd get the paycheck and they'd immediately come home and go rush to the grocery store to buy the food as much as they could. And the reason they do that is they knew that a week later it'd be more. And so the money was losing value that quickly, week on week. And so, and of course, eventually what happens, currency totally failed. And that was very chaotic because there was no food for a while. It was really a mess. However, what happened is the people who had things to sell quickly started saying, well, I'll take dollars. I'll accept dollars. And, some of the people there had dollars in overseas accounts. They'd bring them in, whatever. And he said, so we went to a dollar-based system. And by the way, dollar's fiat, and it's not as good as gold or Bitcoin, but it was sounder than what they were dealing with, which was terrible, right? And he said, in a year, everything was normal again. People were doing, and we were just on a different currency. And so what's really wrong here is the currency is broken. And if we fix the currency, the system it'll self-correct. It'll self-heal. Now, don't get me wrong, between here and it being fixed, there will be big time winners and losers. Because how do you get from here to that? There's going to be a lot of inflation. That's what the book talks about. And so those people, first of all, if you own a long-term bond, your purchasing power is just going to get, really whacked hard. And if you have a fixed money pension, like Social Security or whatever it might be, the government will still keep paying it to you, but what it buys, you're going to be pretty shocked at how bad how bad the money is depreciated in value. It's not going to buy as much. But this is actually a necessity because we've created more obligations than we can fulfill with the existing money supply and the existing GDP. And so we have to inflate. We either have to repudiate the debt, which says, just cancel it, or, default on it, which would be kind of unthinkable and would lead to kind of a 1929 depression type situation, or we need to print enough money to make the underlying GDP closer to the size of the debt, which would be highly inflationary. But if we said we're going to print this money and do this, and then as we do it, we're going to reset to a new higher level for gold or Bitcoin, and they are going to become the reserve currency, the inflation would stop. It would stop. And so I think people would be willing to live with knowing that there's a better time ahead. They might be willing to live with a tough transition. That's kind of how I see it. But don't get me wrong, I may have it wrong. And when I say it's going to be tough, it could be orders of magnitude tougher than I think. But frankly, continuing along in the system we have, that's pretty tough too. I think the country is hurting right now because of the COVID inflation. Wait till the next one comes. I entitled the book The Big Print because I think we've got another one coming because of the Stein's Law and a lot of other things I can explain in a minute. But, to be complete disclosure, we've had two big prints. We had one in '08, with the QE that they did there and the 0% interest rates they did there. And we had another one in 2020. And the second one was bigger and faster. And so I think the next one's going to be bigger and faster still. And what's that going to do? That's going to mean even more inflation. And it might be on the peak of, more inflation in a declining economy because, Trump just threw kind of a grenade into the world economy with these threats of tariffs. And, I'm not criticizing. I'm getting I know what he's trying to do. I don't disagree with the goal. Whether this is the best way to do it or not is debatable. But, I think there's a good chance that we've been in an everything bubble driven by, low cost funds and growth. And I think what's going to happen is that bubble. I think what's happened is that bubble popped, when Trump did this tariff announcement. I think it's very hard when a bubble pops to, turn it around and go back to new highs. I think a lot of the world thinks we're going to go back to new highs in the stock market. And it would be logical that they would think that because for the past 40 years, that's been the case, right? There have been some drawdowns, but every drawdown you bought the dip and you did fine. The only way, in my view, we see the stock market goes back to new highs is if we have hyperinflation. And if we have hyperinflation, you're going to be better off owning real estate, gold, or Bitcoin than you are stocks. So, we'll just have to see. It's the path is extremely uncertain because we don't know what policy moves the government, the Fed, businesses, and others will make. The probability that have to be and will be more money printing, I rate that as extremely high probability because of the match. And that's not some emotional view. That's just the mathematics of the situation. I mean, in the book, there's a chart that shows, 11 odd countries that got to this level of debt to GDP, around 130%. And in every single one of those cases, they either had a depression, hyperinflation, or extremely high rates of inflation. So, the system it's broken. It's really broken. And to me, Bitcoin is kind of the peaceful protest. And the more people we can get on board to support Bitcoin and to support sound money in general, I think as this pain becomes worse in the next several years, Ben, people are the voters are going to wake up and say, God damn, this is horrible. I can't stand it anymore. Please tell me what we got to do to fix it. And then some
And voting blue, red, blue, red, blue, red over and over does not seem to fix it, does it?
They're not, they had a presidential debate last fall. They didn't even talk about it, right? But what happens when instead of blue, red, there's suddenly somebody's orange, and that guy raised his hand and said, hey, you know what? The problem is the money's really broken. Here's how we fix it. We go to a Bitcoin standard, and if enough people own Bitcoin, if enough people have read my book, if enough people have come to accept that the monetary system is the problem, that person's going to win in a landslide. And, we're going to go in that direction. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that's going to happen immediately, but I think eventually that's where we're going, that humankind will figure out that this other system just doesn't work. It reached its natural expiry date or the end point of fiat currency.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I'm definitely not holding out hope we're going to have a true Bitcoin president that actually understands the problem and is willing to promote these sound money ideals that we talk about. I think it's just much more worth our time to focus on the grassroots education side,
right,
which you're doing with your book. I'm trying to do with this podcast. Just get more people awakened on this and buying Bitcoin themselves, because this is how we force the hand and make those politicians irrelevant, because they have way too much power to screw everything up right now on both sides. And this is why people are so tribal about the Republicans versus Democrat debate, because both sides have so much power to steal freedom from the other side. And that's exactly what they do every time they get in. And so it just causes both sides to be so angry at each other, when really we should just be lowering the amount of power that position has. By getting rid of the money printer, because the money printer gives infinite runaway power to governments.
That's exactly right. You nailed it. That's exactly the correct description of it all. The government, the banks, and the Federal Reserve are all in cahoots. And they've got a system that works really great for them. If you get elected in the government, you can generate a huge net worth on a small salary. If you're a banker, you can become very, very wealthy in a heads they win, tails we all lose scenario, because if they do things that are too risky and it blows up, we print the money to bail them out. They paid $20 billion of bonuses the year after the 2008 bailout. Even if you're a hedge fund, we bail you out. I mean, Ken Griffin got a bailout in March of 2020 when the COVID thing hit, because his basis trade went upside down. And so you get to this thing where these big organizations are able to kind of, count on free money in situations where, they get themselves in trouble. So that's kind of the story. And it's somewhat of it's a problem. It's the core of the underlying problem. Basically, the system's broken, but the system is, nature's healing, and things will get fixed over time. And that's why I'm quite optimistic, and that's why I'm so excited for Bitcoin. I think that's why all Bitcoiners are excited. Once you come to see it and understand it, you can't help but be excited that that things are going to get better. And again, that's really the purpose behind the book. I'll just lift it up here and show people. It's on Amazon. It's called The Big Print, and it really, I tried to write it. I don't know, who's read it and whatnot, but I tried to write it at a level that, you don't need to know what monetary economics are. You don't need to be into this stuff. You just need to kind of read it and hear the story. And I think what you'll realize is that, oh, yeah, this really is wrong. And they've it's not American. It's not fair what they're doing and they've done. And, there are a lot more of us than there are people in the banks and the Federal Reserve, and we have a vote on what happens here. So, they've done it in a sophisticated way, and they put it in great language that make them sound like they're working on behalf of the American people. I mean, Jay Powell repeats that all the time. I'm doing what's best. but they're not. And the book provides compelling evidence of how they are not. And so once you see that, you can't unsee it. And then I think what you do is you get mad and or you start thinking, okay, well, given that's the case, there's a problem here. What's the solution? And the second half of the book is the solution. I mean, Bitcoin really is the solution. So,
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a great overview of the current situation, just for people who are, tuning in, trying to figure out where we're at right now.
yeah.
What I'd love to do now is sort of reel things back to where I know that you are so good at talking about, which is just what is money? And I'm going to steal Robert Breedlove's famous question here. Money itself. How would you answer this question? What is money?
Yeah. Well, money should be two or three different things, but the most important two of which are it should be a store of value and it should be a medium of exchange. And so, people do work in their lives and, they create things of value, either services or they make goods or they grow crops. And so those people should be rewarded. It's like the Bible. You reap and then you sow. And so if you sow a harvest, you've now got grain that can create bread, and people want to eat bread, so they should pay you money to eat that bread because, you might need some goats, but trading goats for wheat is kind of inconvenient. So, there's some intermediate step that got created a long time ago. But even in the old days before gold emerged as money, they did have ledgers, Sumerian ledgers, where they did keep track of goats and wheat, and they had goat wheat prices. They figured out how to exchange. But really, money is the universal item. Karl Menger, the founder of the Austrian school, said it's the most liquid good that we all universally accept as having value, and that's an important thing. It's actually perception, not intrinsic nature, that creates value. Although the intrinsic nature leads to the perception, at the end of the day, it's the perception. So money really becomes, that medium of exchange that people use to pay for goods and services. Now, it also should be able to store money through time because, or value through time because, when you're young, you might be able to work very hard and make a lot of money, and then as you grow older, you don't have as much money, and you need to figure out how to, you want to live off your savings. So it's important that money store value over time. And of course, that's where the dollar has really, really fallen apart because they're continually printing it and diluting it. It's turned out to not be a very good store of value. It's lost 97% of its value since, the earlier part of the century. So, the gold bugs say, well, only something physical like gold that could also be used as jewelry, only that is money. But they're not right about that because, in fact, money is really a ledger. At the end of the day, it's a social obligation between people. And it's what, people will trade goods and services and time for. And it's what we all agree. And the prices are based on what the quality of the money is. And so, you have money in your bank account, but the dollar bills aren't there. You can't go down and say, give me the money in my bank account. You could, but if the numbers are big, they wouldn't have the cash on hand. It's really just a digital entry. So at the end of the day, it's just a log of who owes who what. And even before gold became money, we see records of, cave guys drawing stuff on the wall, markers. And it was probably some means of keeping track of who owed who about what they'd hunted. And, gold wasn't even discovered yet. So we've got money is really at the end of the day, it's a ledger. And I think probably the most important characteristic of money that makes it money is that there needs to be a limit on its issuance. It needs to be somewhat scarce, and there needs to be actual effort expended to create it. So, to create, the two best independent forms of money are gold and Bitcoin, and you can't create either one of those without doing proof of work, without significant effort. If you want to get an ounce of gold, you've got to mine it. It takes a lot of capital, a lot of time, a lot of investment to pull that gold out of the ground. If you want to create new Bitcoin, you've got to do the same thing. You've got to mine it and approve blocks, and you get the block reward. And so, it's what Jack Mallers said. And the central banks tip it all up on its end. They literally can, with a keystroke, create money. And, I love Jack Mallers' line, which is, no man should be able to create with a keystroke what everyone else has to work for. And that's really the nature of the problem, that we've got this fiat money that they can create with a keystroke. And they tell you they're not going to abuse the thing, and they say they're doing what's in your best interest and all that stuff. But the history of it all, if you look at it, and the book lays this out, is just continual abuse. And sadly, which we all, the further part of the history is when you see that when countries and societies go through this, very often, eventually, it leads to just a complete collapse. I mean, the average age of the average fiat currency is like 40 or 50 years. And, we've kind of now been on fiat currency standard, coming off the gold standard in 71, it's about 54 years. And so, that's an interesting data point to me that, we're kind of reaching that average point. Now, could it go on a bit longer? Sure, it could. But, I think what we've seen, we've seen the behavior of the central banks that would now indicate to me that we are in the end game, and what is money is going to be redefined. And that's the question to be answered in this fourth turning. And I think when this fourth turning is over, money will be gold, silver, and Bitcoin. And the dollar will probably exist as a medium of exchange, but it won't be anything to store value in. So.
Yeah. And gold will always hold a special place in my heart, because I've told this story many times, how I finally got out of the crypto hole, which I was in for a few years from 2017 to 2020. When I was locked down during the lockdowns in New Zealand, actually, I was living at the time in this little tiny house Airbnb on a nice little beach town. I realized that this is a good time for me to start learning about random stuff. Like, I have a lot of free time. So I stumbled across Mike Maloney's YouTube channel, his Hidden Secrets of Money series,
it's a great series, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, it's fantastic. And for me, that was what finally clicked it for me, which is, okay, sound money really is the ultimate goal here.
Yes.
Not all these different crypto utilities and things like this. No. It's we need to fix fiat money. We need to get rid of the money printer.
Yes.
And
exactly.
I know Mike Maloney is purely a gold bug. He's not even really a Bitcoin guy. He has like a couple.
I think he's anti-Bitcoin, though. I think he's receptive to it, but I don't think he's embraced it as fully as you and I have. Right?
Yeah. Like, he does have one episode in that series about Bitcoin, but it kind of trails off into some other shitcoin. So, to me, the ultimate thing that Mike Maloney has done is just really help educate people on why fiat is bad, which you and I have both seen. This is something that the gold bugs and the Bitcoiners are 100% in agreement with.
Yeah.
That fiat money is the problem.
Correct.
And we can all get on the same side and support this mission. And as long as more people are understanding that, they're going to naturally come to the conclusion that when you have these different options available for the solution, I really think Bitcoin is better than gold. Would you agree with that?
Better than gold, and once you study it, you get there. But I view all Bitcoin. I view all the gold people as pre-Bitcoiners. I mean, at least they understand the issue and they want sound money. They're just, they're like I was, and a lot of them are like I was in the initial days. They're kind of like, oh, hang on, how can this be computer based? That just doesn't. They don't believe in it. They just don't see it yet. But what I would suggest is that if they do the work and they dig deep enough, that eventually, as we all know, when you understand how it's all put together, you kind of come to the conclusion that, wow, this is real and it's going to work. So that does take time and study. And skepticism. I mean, skepticism is fine. The book has a lot of that. There's a chapter on skepticism. There's a chapter that rebuts, all the major criticisms. I mean, and I held some of those myself. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Michael Saylor was tweeting in 2013 and he thought Bitcoin was bullshit, but he changed his view on it because as he studied it, he realized he was wrong, and so, anybody who has a negative view of it, who hasn't studied it, all I would say is just, fine, hold on to your negative view, but study it a bit and see if you still come to the same conclusion. And I've watched a lot of people go from hating it to being, raging Bitcoin bulls. So, but that process it takes time. I mean, it doesn't happen in a day. It takes time, it takes knowledge, it takes seeing things play out, etc.
And it takes a lot of mental fortitude and resilience, because every single one of us has been through our first Bitcoin touch point where we heard about it and we said, oh, that's a scam. Right. Or, oh, I'll get a crypto coin instead. It'll be the next Bitcoin.
Right.
No one hears Bitcoin the first time and buys it. That's not what happens.
Some do it, yeah, but you're right.
It's so rare. You have to have a really good Austrian economics background, I feel like, for people to, or like a technical background to understand a white paper.
Yes.
Those are kind of the only two buckets of people I hear that consistently, get it quickly.
I think
the majority of us idiots don't.
I think that's right. Quickly. Yeah, I think it's right.
And you have to just have that ability to forgive your past self and say, you know what, I didn't get it back then. That's okay. Yeah. We're still so early to this thing that, getting it now is such an early. here's a question. How early are we, Larry? Because you mentioned that we're early to this thing. So many people out there see Bitcoin hovering around 100K. They're like, oh,
I'm,
but my friend got it when it was hundreds of dollars or a few $1,000s, so I'm too late. How early are we really?
yeah, so it's a great question. Let's address it with two things I like to rely upon. One is the Jesse Meyer chart that shows the total available assets, financial assets in the world at $900 trillion now. So this is all stocks, all bonds, all real estate, all cash worldwide is $900 trillion. Total market cap today of Bitcoin is $2 trillion. So we are 2/900ths of all the assets out there. That's 0.2%. That's pretty small for something that's a better form of money than anything we've ever seen before. So, Bitcoin could go from 100,000 to a million, which would be 10x, and it would still only be 2% of all the assets. I mean, cash is like 18% of all the assets. So now, am I saying we're going to take over all the assets? I don't know. I mean, we got to see how this all shakes out. But my point is, for those who think they're too late, they're very much wrong, in my view, just because of the total available market that we can try and capture and the fact that we're still very early days in terms of adoption. The other thing I like to use the, I can't pay this, you got it cheaper thing. I try and make the metaphor of, let's examine the fiat money system and say it's failing. And so, it kind of looks like the Titanic, and we know the Titanic, that one end tipped up and then eventually it sank and it was dead. And the fiat money system has some characteristics like that. I'm not sure that's what's going to happen. We might save it before it sinks, but it has characteristics like that. Okay, so lifeboats, if you're on the Titanic, you got a seat on the lifeboat. Well, that's good. You're not going to go down with a ship. And in the olden days, you could buy a gold lifeboat for $300 an ounce, or, in the 2015, you could buy it for $1,000 an ounce. And now if you want to buy a gold seat, lifeboat seat, you got to pay $3,400 or $3,500 an ounce. Okay, fine. In the old days, Bitcoin, you could buy $100, $1, $100, $1,000, $10,000, $20,000. Well, now you got to pay 85. But frame it in terms of, you're on the Titanic. Do you want the lifeboat seat or not? Yeah, some other people bought those seats cheaper than you did. That's gone. You can't do that anymore. They were the early adopters, and they get rewarded for being early adopters. But you can still buy it today, and someday everyone's going to want to buy it, and it's not going to be at 85. It's going to be at 8 million. So, that's those are two ways I try to frame that. And it's very hard for people. I mean, I know a lot of people look at a financial asset and they say, well, it's going up. And once it goes up a bit, I'm going to take my profit and get out of it. And I say, well, fine, but what for? Where else are you going to go? Because, it says, Michael Saylor says, it's going up forever, Laura. I mean, it's something that has never existed before. A commodity, the supply cannot be expanded. I mean, price of gold goes up, we make more gold. Price of oil goes up, we'll drill for more oil. Price of anything goes up. Corn goes up, we'll plant more corn. Price of Bitcoin goes up, doesn't matter, same amount. And so that thing, I mean, the fact that we have a financial asset with that characteristic, that's just different. It's literally, we've never had that before, which is why I often say, I think when the history is written of this time, we'll look at it and we'll say, there's before Bitcoin and after Bitcoin, in the financial markets. Because after Bitcoin, we had, natural scarcity. I mean, just true, immutable scarcity. And that should continue to go up forever. And so, if you want to be a part of that, you've got to own some.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And something I'd love to look at here, just while we're on a topic of looking back at history, which I think is the most important thing we can do right now as we try to figure out what's going to happen in the future. There have been rhymes of this in the past, and you have a good understanding of the actual adoption of gold as the early days of it as people were figuring it out. I know it was a really long time ago, so it's sort of tough to really have clear history sometimes. But what did we learn about gold adoption? How did that look? And how do you think Bitcoin adoption will be similar or different?
Well, I wasn't around when gold got adopted, but I'm sure there were times when the price of gold fluctuated wildly in terms of other things. And I know there wasn't a lot of gold, and that was one of the problems. And that's why actually silver became money, because there's more silver in the world than there is gold. And so it was easier to do transactions in silver. But, I think any form of monetary system that's being adopted is going to be volatile. And there were periods in the adoption of gold where there was a lot of inflation because, as an example, when they raided the Incan temples in the 1600s, the Spanish brought back tons of silver and gold, and so suddenly you had an enormous growth of the money supply, and so that inflated everything in terms of prices. I mean, gold right now grows at about 1.7% a year. That's the amount outstanding, or the production compared to amount outstanding. I mean, when the gold rush happened in 1849 in California, they found a ton of gold and they very quickly started mining it, and the supply of gold grew very rapidly, and there was inflation. So, it's these other examples aren't perfectly comparable to Bitcoin because Bitcoin's got this mathematical algorithm that's not going to change. And these other examples had, geological hotspots where, we found a bunch of gold and therefore we had some inflation. So it's a little bit of an apple and an orange. But, the reason that Bitcoin is so volatile, in my opinion, is that we're going through that period where it's either the greatest thing in the world or, it's dead. And so when it's the greatest thing in the world, it gets way ahead of itself. People use leverage, they borrow, they lever themselves up, they buy it, they push it up these crazy numbers. Then they realize, oh, you know what? It's ahead of itself. It's not going to go up that quickly. Adoption has not changed that much. It's just a steady growth. Gosh, that's too expensive. We're going to sell it. And then they sell it back down and it goes below the trend line. And so, but that volatility, that built-in volatility based on the adoption curve kind of flipping back and forth, that will eventually flatten out. These drawdowns will not be as large or as common because it'll just be a bigger, broader market in the asset. So, it's going to get better. Volatility is going to get better.
Yeah, and one of the most popular charts that we like to look at in Bitcoin land is that chart of the price of gold in Weimar, Germany during the hyperinflation.
Yeah, Dan Oliver did that chart. It's a fabulous chart, and it shows how monetary events are volatile. They really are. I mean, look, money is at the core level of all human activity, and if the money is going up and the money is going down in value, it creates a lot of chaos. So it's a problem. Oh, there you go. Yeah, that's it. So we should tell the people. So this is the black line on the right scale, and it's a log scale, is the number, the gold price in Weimar marks. And what you can see is that the Weimar mark effectively became worthless. I mean, it got to the point where, they were using it to burn furnaces. It took billions of Weimar marks to create, 1 gram of gold. That was the end point. And it started in the beginning where, it took 1 Weimar mark for a gram of gold. But what happened is you can see the red line is the monthly percentage change in the gold price. So it measured against the Weimar marks. So what you see is you had these big up months, but they also had big down months. It was back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So, and if you had been leveraged, and you had one of those things where it not only went down, but it went negative, then you could have gotten blown out of your position. So this is why, Bitcoin, I always say Bitcoin is, it's not something you need to lever. There's enough optionality, asymmetry, and upside in this that it can be perfectly, you can do extremely well without adding leverage. So
yeah, absolutely. And I just want to real quick for listeners, the chart I pulled up here, I'll put it in the description, but basically you have this red line representing gold over the course of hyperinflation in Weimar, Germany, back in, what year was this? The early 30s?
The inflation really occurred in 21, 2, and 3, but it's...
Oh, it's there at the bottom. So like 1914 through 1923. The gold price is all over the place, extremely chaotic, similar to what many see Bitcoin as today.
Exactly.
But the end of the game, the end of the story is straight line up, and the fiat price going to zero because paper always goes to zero in value because that is its value, it's nothing.
That's exactly right. And sadly, that might be what we have to look forward to if they don't get smart here and do a reset, which I hope they do, because that would be a very painful event, but it might be where we go. I mean, sadly, politicians don't really think forward. They tend to just respond to crises. And so sadly, we may end up with some kind of a crisis here before they figure out that sound money is the right solution.
Yeah, they're not incentivized to think long term because they only care about their 4-year term and maybe getting reelected. So just
Right.
promising more free stuff to people, which we know just encourages more of these degenerate practices that causes more problems. So
Exactly.
this is why voting for Bitcoin is the best vote you can do.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So I know we're coming up a few minutes left here to your hard stop. So why don't we finish things off here with just a little bit of hyper Bitcoinization predictions from you, Larry? I know that we're talking a lot about how, we're
Yeah.
really early this thing. We have a lot of things to be excited about as Bitcoin holders and a lot of things for even non-Bitcoin holders to be excited about. Deflation is coming. So things are going to stop getting more expensive all the time once Bitcoin wins, which is good for everyone.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on just what we have coming up here in
Yeah.
the next 5 years, 10
Let's talk
years?
about the timeline just more briefly. I mean, first of all, I think we broke out of the 58K club and we went up to 106, and then we formed a flag in the 96 area, and we dipped below that, but I think the flag does hold. And I think their next move is I think before the end of this year, Bitcoin will be 140,000 a coin, in my opinion, as the next leg up develops, and it could be even higher than that depending upon what they do in terms of the big print and money printing. I think on a longer term basis, the next 4 years of Trump will have slowing growth, troubled bond market, printing money, more inflation, and both gold and Bitcoin will go up, Bitcoin more substantially than gold. I think at the end of that 4 year period, the country will be very frustrated, mad, angry, suffering from inflation, economic downturn, and not that the other side's any better, because I don't really think they are, but they'll vote the bums out and they'll vote for the Democrats who will promise UBI and stimmy checks and big budget deficits, and we can spend our way out of this problem, which we can't. And so they'll get in there, maybe high taxes on certain individuals, and so they'll get in there and make things even worse. And then we'll get really high inflation. I mean, like 20-30% a year. I mean, kind of monetary failure, sort of the inflation. The thing that started to happen in Weimar, and then I think either that'll go to its natural conclusion, which is the dollar becomes worthless, or I think more likely, and part of the reason I wrote the book was, people will realize what's happening. They'll realize it's the money printer. They'll realize it's the Fed, and some politician will stand up in that cycle and say, "This is the problem, folks. We need to fix it," and they will win overwhelmingly, and we will do a reset, a currency reset, where we're now on the Bitcoin standard. I mean, that's kind of the best hoped for solution, and that's kind of how I see it unfolding. And so, what does that mean if Trump's term runs to 2028? So, that means kind of sometime before 2032, fiat has failed, and we've got we're on a hard money standard again. I mean, that's kind of my midline base case. It could take longer, it could happen sooner, but that's kind of my midline base case for what we're talking about here. And in that case, by the way, I mean, gold's going to be over 10,000, maybe 15 or 20, and Bitcoin's going to be 500,000 to 1 million to 1.5 million. I mean, it's going to be so much higher, and that's all just a function of really the loss of confidence in the government. I mean, some people say, well, if we could get the government to balance the budget, great, but and that's somewhat true, but getting that to happen is just a really tall order and very hard to do when 80% of the spending is locked into interest, defense and boomer entitlements, and the boomers are still a big enough voting bloc that you can't cut those entitlements. So, it's kind of baked in the cake, frankly, that they're going to continue to print money, and that's going to lead to continued inflation getting worse. And then, what I hope for is we get politicians who see that that's really the issue, and they fix it. So.
Moral of the episode: don't have zero Bitcoin, please.
Correct. Yeah, that's a no-brainer. And I think anybody who buys Bitcoin now will be, in 10 years' time and 20 years' time, they will be extremely glad they did. I have a pretty high level of confidence in that. So,
and getting higher every day for me. Every 10 minutes we get a new block, I'm even more confident. So yeah, Larry, I will include the links to all the things we talked about here: your book, your Nostr, your Twitter, which hopefully Elon will let you out of Twitter jail soon. Is there anything else that you'd like to throw out here for people to follow you on?
That's really it. I mean, thank you so much for giving me the platform. And all I would say is, if people, obviously I make a little money buying the book or selling the book, but not much. What I would really say, I'm trying to spread a message, because I think if we want to get the country back on the right track, we got to go back to sound money. And I think the book is a very good tool for helping people who don't understand what sound money is to learn about what sound money is. I wrote it in a style to make it fun and engaging. So hopefully, if you like the book, pass it along to your friends. I mean, it'd be great if we get this thing to go viral, so that everyone has read it and everyone's like, oh my God, we got to do this, because that would make what you and I want to have happen. It would happen sooner, and the Band-Aid, ripping the Band-Aid off hurts, right? But the longer it goes, the bigger it's going to hurt, right? So let's rip it off now and then just go back to sound money, right?
Amen, man. 100% on that. Couldn't agree more. Lawrence Lepard, my man, it has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. And everyone go order this book. And I look forward to seeing you in Las Vegas. I'll meet you there.
Yeah, we'll see you there, Ben. Thank you so much.